Hello and welcome to lecture number 37. This is topic 3.2, Social Life, Reuniting Black Families, and the Freedmen's Bureau. We'll begin with the learning objective regarding the Freedmen's Bureau, which asks you to describe the purpose of this agency. The Freedmen's Bureau was an agency established between 1865 and 1872 to aid in the process of Reconstruction. As we discussed in the last lecture, the two primary goals of the federal government during Reconstruction were to readmit and reconstruct the Southern Confederate States and to protect the rights of the newly freed people. The agency was officially called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, and it was under the control of the U.S. Army, commanded by General Oliver O. Howard. Despite its noble intent to protect the rights of African Americans, the Bureau was consistently underfunded by Congress. At no time did it have more than 900 agents to manage the needs of the newly freed 3 million people in the South. Most of these agents were white, as the positions were primarily filled by Army officers, and there were few black officers in the military at the time. The Bureau's creation was one of the first federal efforts to address the systemic inequalities faced by African Americans after slavery, marking a significant, albeit imperfect, step towards civil rights. Some of the Bureau's objectives included helping to educate the newly freed population, assisting them in obtaining land and settling legal disputes, negotiating labor contracts, and providing food, medical care, and transportation. The labor contracts were particularly important because many newly emancipated people in the South, their only financial opportunity was to return to the plantations where they had been enslaved. The only difference was that they were now supposed to be paid for their labor, and the Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to help them secure fair contracts with their former enslavers. The Bureau also tried to help people navigate the difficult conditions of Reconstruction. It distributed clothing and food, particularly in areas like Georgia that were decimated by Sherman's campaign. Much of the infrastructure, including railroads, roads, buildings, and towns, were destroyed, leaving people vulnerable to famine and epidemics. The destruction during Sherman's March to the Sea, which aimed to cripple the Confederacy's war capabilities, had a lasting impact on the Southern economy and infrastructure. A smallpox epidemic that swept through the South affected both black and white Southerners. By 1866, the Bureau had distributed 13 million rations of food in the form of flour and grains. The Bureau also played a role in legalizing marriages, which we'll discuss in more detail shortly. It established schools and cooperated with religious organizations to staff them with teachers. The Bureau allocated $500,000 for this purpose. Additionally, it managed abandoned and confiscated property. Initially, General Howard attempted to set aside at least 40-acre plots for newly freed people through Circular 13, a special order issued by the Bureau. However, this effort was reversed along with Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15 because President Andrew Johnson pardoned many of the large landholders whose land had been confiscated. Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15 is often remembered for its promise of 40 acres and a mule to freed slaves, a promise that was never fully realized due to political opposition. The redistribution of confiscated land was a particularly unpopular move amongst the rest of the country, as it involved taking property without due process. The second learning objective is to explain how, after abolition and the Civil War, African Americans strengthened family bonds that had been disrupted by enslavement. The centuries-long institution of slavery had severely disrupted black families, as relatives were forcibly sold and